All over time. Doing very bad for you guys, I must say. But I'm happy that you're all back and here. Okay, so we didn't really get a chance to explain so much what we're doing in this course because we went straight into Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But I like to deal with interpersonal development, meaning my relationships with other people, and intrapersonal development, things that go on inside me. So I'm going to try to find a balance between those two things. I like to start the year with interpersonal for a specific reason. You're in a new environment, you're meeting new people, and a lot of the ways you relate to people kind of surface in its most intense ways now, because this is not your old friends from high school who you've known forever. It's new people, and some of our patterns of the way we relate to people are coming up like probably now pretty strongly. I promised you that we were going to go into hakpada on a deeper level, which is like the internalized anger. But first, I want to do another midah that leads into hakpada. So really, the midah that I want to deal with is what I call hypercriticism, and it's our critical nature. I always find that girls, we're kind of a little two-faced because as a gender, as compared to men, we're softer and sweeter, and yet we often are much harsher in our head than we are in our externals, and we're much harsher than men. Even though they might come off tough, they're sweeter inside. We're sweeter externally, but we're tougher inside. And I see this very often when I'm involved in counseling, helping a couple who's dating. So the guy will come and say, she's a great girl, and the girl will go, well, I'm not sure about this, I'm not sure about that. She takes out her shopping list of all the things that are bothering her about him. And it's not that he has lower standards. He's more forgiving. He's more willing to see the bigger picture. We're a little tough. So I always think, you pass by somebody and you say, hi, how you doing? You look great, have a great day. And then you're thinking, she thinks she looks good in that outfit, and blah, blah, blah. And so like this internal negativity sometimes. So if this doesn't resonate by you, then you're lucky. But you definitely will deal with people in life who it does. And we're dealing with the midah of hypercriticism, of being very too critical. And how do we moderate this midah for ourselves? So I'm going to start with the places in the Torah that talk to us about this midah, and then we're going to get into some kind of insight in the way we work. So there's a pasuk in Vayikra, Parak Yutet, pasuk Tet Vav, that says, "B'tzedek tishpot amitecha." B'tzedek tishpot amitecha means judge your friends fairly. This pasuk, the pshat, is not about what we're talking about now. The pshat, if you look in the Sefer Mitzvot, the pshat in this pasuk is talking to judges. That if you are a judge in a court, you have to judge people fairly. You cannot take bribery. You have to be fair. The Sefer Mitzvot says that there's three aspects of this mitzvah. One of them is talking to judges. B'tzedek tishpot amitecha. If you're a judge, judge fairly. Number two, very interesting, b'tzedek tishpot amitecha. If you are capable of becoming a judge, please become one, because we need fair judges for our community. So please, please go judge your people fairly, meaning please become a judge. Number three, and this is what we're getting to today, is that every one of us is a judge in the courtroom of our own minds. And the Torah is telling you, you're a judge already. Please judge fairly. Okay? Now, we all know, because people throw around this concept of dan l'kav zchus, right? Judging favorably. And that comes from this pasuk in Vayikra. Because the Gemara in Masechet Shvos, Daf Lamed, says about this pasuk, b'tzedek tishpot amitecha, hedei dan et chavercha l'kav zchut. Please judge your friends favorably. Look for the good. And we all talk about dan l'kav zchut. And part of the problem that I think that we have is that for those of you who went to Jewish kindergartens, it's one of these things that you're explained on a certain very basic level, meaning if you see your friend walking into McDonald's and he's munching on something that looks like a cheeseburger, so then maybe he brought his kosher sandwich in, or maybe your glasses need to be cleaned and it's not really McDonald's. It's explained on a very basic level, almost like it's like this game. Like, oh, she didn't really do that, This is much more sophisticated than that, but we're kind of stuck on our kindergarten level that, oh, I better clean my glasses, she probably didn't do it. In fact, we're going to quote Rav Tzvi Mara Zilberberg, who I think I maybe mentioned before, the big tzaddik in Yerushalayim. It's a whole book on being Dina Kafschot. Now, in order for you to understand what I'm about to say now, I want to preface and explain to you who Schoonmaker is. Schoonmaker Zilberg is this tzaddik, holy, like very careful with what he looks at, careful about everything, very, 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 very high personal standards, right? And yet, a tremendous love for every Jew who does not have the same standards as him. So he might be functioning on plane up here, but he comes in contact with a person who's not functioning on the level, and all he could see is good in that person. So he wrote a book called Diyun L'Kafschot about judging favorably. And I want to tell you, I once spoke about him in this context. I said what I just said right now. And one of my students said to me that her brother had a friend who came from a very religious home, but was off the derech. So he was backpacking around the world with a long ponytail, tattoos, a million earrings, came to Israel. He said so cynically, he said, everybody was nice to me. Everybody invited me for dinner, everybody wanted me to come for Shabbos, everybody offered to do my laundry. He says, but they weren't being nice to me. They were being nice to my tattoos. Meaning they all wanted the mitzvah of getting me back into the fold, so they're all being nice to me so that I could come back. And he was so cynical that even when people were being nice to him, all he could think of was, oh, you just want to be Makar of me. He didn't think that anybody cared about him. Somebody took him to Schoonmaker, who was this big, holy, Hasidish-looking tzaddik, and he said that was the first person that when he gave me a smile, I said, he's not smiling at me in order to be Makar of me. He's smiling at me because he likes me. And that's this person. That's what Schoonmaker Zilberg. He's capable of looking at somebody and not saying, okay, let's do a job on this guy, get him to be religious. But I love this person. So when Schoonmaker says what he's going to say now, you're talking about somebody who has very high personal standards and loves everybody who doesn't have the same standards as him. How do you get there? So Schoonmaker says something fascinating, and I don't know how much this will resonate by you. He says, being critical of another person's behavior is never coming from a good place in you. Even when it's a religious thing, I can't stand to watch people who dress like that. I can't stand to hear words like that. You feel holy when you're thinking, but I can't stand it. And he's saying it's not coming from a holy place in you. You might be right about the value that good words or proper dress is appropriate, but the fact that you're intense and you're obsessing about why is she using those words, that midah, that intensity is not coming from a good place. It could be about a good topic, but the way it's manifesting in your personality is not coming from a high place. Why? He says, because why are you obsessing about it? There are many problems in the world, right? And we want to fix a lot of things in the world. But if you can't, I can't stand the way she talks. I can't stand the way she talks. How could you dress like that? How could you talk like that? How could you? The fact that you are obsessing is coming from the low place in your personality, the critical place, the need to one-up somebody. So we have to make a distinction between sensitivities. It's good to have sensitivities, but if my sensitivities are making me very negative about someone specific, that phenomena is not coming from a high place in my personality, it's coming from a lower place, my need to be negative. So Schoonmaker says something fascinating. He says, people think that this midah of being Dina Kafschot, he says very, very cutely, he says, you know, you have 613 mitzvot in the Torah. So you have mitzvot for men, mitzvot for women, mitzvot for kohanim, and Baruch Hashem, we have one mitzvah for naive people. That's what people think Dina Kafschot is. Oh, she didn't really do that. I'm sure my glasses need to be clean. I'm sure she didn't really say that. And we think that this is a good mitzvah for people who are naive anyway. You know, if you're naive, then you could think that everybody meant well. He says, actually, this is a midah for very cognitively sophisticated people. Why? Because when you have a preconceived notion about somebody, that's already stuck in your head. To have the cognitive flexibility to change the way you perceive something is very, very sophisticated. I met her. I think she's that type. It's really hard to break out of thinking that she's that type. And you know what? The more psychologically insightful you are, the more difficult it is to break out of the way you think. Because I know people. I'm a pretty good judge of character. And I already sized you up a certain way. To switch the way I think is incredibly sophisticated. It's not easy. So this is not a mitzvah for naive people. It's a mitzvah for people who have a certain kind of mental ability to change the way they think, which is not easy. Now let's get into it a little bit. So this midah of being Dina Kafschot we're going to have a more so first of all, I'd like to change your preconceived notions about this midah. it's not about just clean your glasses and maybe it wasn't really a cheeseburger. The Chafetz Chaim says that there's 5 levels that you have to go through in your head, and you have to move from one to the other until you find something that resonates by you as being true. And if it feels like a little game that you're playing with yourself, oh, she didn't really do it, then move on to the next one. Because it has to sit with you as, oh, okay, now I can look at her in a positive light. So what's number 1? Number 1 is what the Chafetz Chaim will call etzem ha'isur, meaning etzem ha'davar. You think the person did something. Maybe they didn't do what you think they did. So maybe, am I really understanding properly what I just think I observed? And sometimes we make mistakes on that level. Let's say, I know what I saw. It's not resonating by me that there's some mistake in the way that the person didn't do it. Next thing is, maybe the person did do the thing that you think that they did, but they didn't realize it was asur. People do things, make mistakes, don't know halacha, don't know about a certain sensitivity, whatever it is. So that's the concept, and maybe the person did it, they really did do it, so that's already number 2, but they didn't realize that it was asur. Let's say you have to move on to number 3. Why? This person learned in my school, she knows halacha very well, she knows that she's not allowed to do that, she's my rabbi's daughter, I don't know, impossible that she doesn't know. Number 3, she didn't realize how bad it was. Meaning, people sometimes do things, we all make mistakes about things that we're not allowed to do. But some people don't have a sense of how bad it is, and here's a certain kind of subjectivity also. In her mind, it wasn't so bad what she did. Let's say even that is not resonating by you for some reason. Because you know this person very well, and because you know that they really do have a value system where they should realize that it's bad. Number 4. Number 4, I am missing a detail in this story. I had to tell you girls that this one was the hardest one for me. Because, what do you mean I'm missing a detail? What kind of detail? Sometimes you're missing a detail, but sometimes like, what could I really be missing here? So I have to stop here for a second and tell you a great story about missing a detail. Did I tell you a story about my giving out licorice to my son and his friend on Erev Shabbos? Did I mention that here? No. Sometimes I'll ask you that because sometimes I forget what I mentioned where. This goes back many years ago when my oldest son was around 4 years old. I was a first-time mother trying to be really careful to do all the right things that the books say. And it was a Friday night, and we had just lit candles, and a little boy who lived like 5 doors down from my house came to visit my son. So I had this thing that after I light candles, I give the kids a little treat. So I was giving out licorice. So I gave him a piece of licorice, he gobbles it up, and he asked me for another piece. I give him the second piece, and he gobbles it up, and he asked me for a third piece. And I'm beginning to think like maybe his mother doesn't want him to eat so much candy before dinner. So I said to him, you know, if you want another piece, you'll come back next week, sweetie, and after we light candles, I'll give you licorice then. So he looks me in the face. He's 4 years old. He says to me, but I can't come back next week. I'm going to be living in Australia by then. To which I'm thinking, that's really weird. He's like my neighbor 5 houses down. You know, he's going to be living in Australia. I thought that was like an interesting thing to get a piece of licorice. But okay. I said to him, okay, if that doesn't work for you, so go home and ask your mother if you can have another piece. He looks me straight in the eye and he says to me, I can't ask my mother, she's dead. So I said to myself, oh my gosh, this is my neighbor 5 houses down, she's not dead. And how far will the child go to get a piece of licorice? So with my psychological head, I'm thinking, is this pathological lying? Can you call a 4-year-old a pathological liar? It definitely seems pathological to say that your mother's dead to get a piece of licorice, but I don't know if for a 4-year-old you can call that pathology. But my mind is like already working, like my son is friends with a kid who is a tremendous liar. What should I do about it? Should I tell the mother? Should I not? It's like kind of churning there. Okay. The next morning, I get a knock on my door. Hi, we're coming by to invite you to a goodbye party for Robin and her family. They're moving to Australia this week. So I already knew that the first part of the story was true. But if I'm going to Robin's party, she's clearly alive, so the second part was not true, right? Go to the party, and Robin is South African. I don't know if anybody here is South African, so the jargon is a little different. I said to her, I can't believe I didn't know you're moving to South Africa. She said, yeah, no, my husband just got a job offer last week. We're packing up like very quickly. It was a very quick decision. I said, how are you managing this? You have all these little children. How are you getting it together? She said, Dina, I've been working nonstop. I'm so tired. I'm just dead. I'm dead. And all of a sudden I realized when he looked at me in his eye, he said, I can't ask my mother for liquor. She's dead. He meant she's so tired. She's sprawled out on the couch. I can't go bother her. Everything he said was true. I was missing a detail. Missing a detail was the cultural nuances of what he was saying. He was moving to Australia and his mother was dead, even though I saw her walk down the street. So it taught me that when the Chafetz Chaim is telling you you're missing a detail, stretch your mind. You really could be missing a detail, even when it seems like, what's the detail that I'm missing? So that taught me a lesson about judging favorably. We really don't always have the whole picture, even when we're sure that we do. The fifth level of the Chafetz Chaim, if even that concept of missing a detail is not resonating by you, you move down to number 5. And what's number 5? What Chazal say, Al tadun et chavercha ad shetagia limkomo. I'll say it again. Al tadun et chavercha. Don't judge your friend. Ad shetagia limkomo, because you're not him. In psychology, we call this differentiation. Yes? Sure. Al tadun et chavercha. Don't judge your friend. Ad shetagia, until you reach limkomo, his place. Which literally means you are not him. You'll never reach his place. You'll never be in his shoes, in his life. So Chazal are teaching us a message in differentiation. If you went through all the 4 stages and nothing resonates by you, you're at least left with, I am not this person. Even if it's my twin sister, even if it's somebody who's been my friend that went to the same school and has all the same sensitivities, I'm still not her. Meaning, we have a problem. There's something called enmeshment sometimes that we have with people. And mothers and daughters often have this. Enmeshment means that I think that you're experiencing this the way I'm experiencing it. Do you ever hear a mother say with her daughter, she's walking with her daughter, we had a great time at the party last night. Maybe the mother had a great time, maybe the kid had a terrible time. Enmeshment means that sometimes we assume that people experience things exactly the same way we do. And differentiation means that even if you're my child, or even if you're my best friend, or even if you're my twin sister, you experience things differently than me. And that's the final level of the Chafetz Chaim, because differentiation means I can never judge somebody because I don't have their exact constellation of midot, life experiences, background, life situations, difficulties, struggles. It's never going to be exactly the same. No two people are the same. And that's the final level of the Chafetz Chaim, is that you can't judge people because you're not them. And when I talk about cleaning the glasses, it's not literally the dirty glasses that I thought it was McDonald's and it wasn't. It's the glasses of my experience. I'm viewing what you just did through my glasses of my value system, my struggles. To me, that's awful to do that. But that's my glasses, because for me, it's awful to do that. But you're you and I'm me. So the last level of the Chafetz Chaim is differentiation. I'm not you, so why am I judging you? Okay, any questions on this before we move on? We have a lot to do with this topic. And one of the things that I love about this topic is that I'm going to encourage you as we do this to ask yourself, where is that critical side of me? Now, Chazal are going to show us that there's 2 axes for this midah. For some people, it's going to be, who am I critical of? Meaning some people, it's the person. This person triggers me, and anything she does could make me critical. For some people, it's going to have nothing to do with the person. It's going to have to do with the topic. I have a certain topic, that topic drives me crazy, and anybody who I see who messes up in that area, I'm already being critical of them. So let's look first at the who. The who is asking you to analyze about yourself. Who am I critical of? What are my patterns in who I judge favorably, who I'm more easygoing about, who I'm more tight about? Okay, so let's get to it. The Mishnah in Masechet Avos, in Perek Avot, Perek Aleph Mishnah Vav. You know this Mishnah, you've heard it before. Aseh lecha rav, make for yourself a rabbi, Kne lecha chaver, acquire for yourself a friend, purchase for yourself a friend, which is its own topic of why Chazal say Kne lecha chaver, but we'll talk about that a different time. V'hevedan et kol ha'adam l'kaf zchut, and judge all people favorably. The question that the Mefarshim on the Mishnah have is, what is the connection between the beginning of the Mishnah and the end of the Mishnah? The beginning of the Mishnah is talking about getting yourself a rabbi and getting yourself a friend. And then the Mishnah says, and judge all people favorably. So what's the connection? So we're going to see two different types of psyches of people. Let's look at the first one. Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. Anybody who wants to see the sources inside, I'm very happy to make a copy for you if you want to see them. I just like to move on because there's different levels of Hebrew textual skills and I want to get the idea across, so I kind of give you the synopsis, but I'm happy to let you see it inside if you want. Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch says, the context of the Mishnah is fascinating. We are allowed to be discerning in who we choose to be our rabbis and our friends.
What is discerning?
Discerning means to be able to be picky, if you want to put it that way. That's a funny way to say it, but to be choosy, to choose. It's not that everybody's my rabbi and everybody's my friend. And by the way, when I say rabbi, I mean role model. So the Mishnah is telling you, pick your role models, meaning not everybody in the world has to be your rabbi. You're allowed to say, wow, this person I think is good for me. And the same thing with friends. You're allowed to be discerning about choosing friends. Not everybody has to be your best friend. You might say, this person, I don't click with them, or something in our standards are not the same, this is not going to be my best friend. But, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch is saying so insightfully, what happens when you're picky, when you're choosing friends and rabbis? You might be critical of all the people who didn't make the grade. Because I chose this one and I didn't choose that one. So it's in a sense almost like a temptation to focus on, well, why didn't I choose her? Because she's a little this and she's a little that and she's a little that. And that rabbi, he's not my type because he's a little this and he's a little that. The Mishnah is telling you, choose a rabbi, choose a friend, and you have no right to be critical of the people who didn't make the grade. So I'm allowed to say that I chose my friends, but I have to love the people who are not my friends also. I can't be snobby about people who are not my friends. I have to be able to see the good in them. And it's so tempting because you know why you didn't choose them to be your friends. But you have to put in the efforts to think about them positively even though they're not your close friend. Yes?
What is someone just making your life miserable?
Excellent. We're going to get to that also, actually. That's more hakpada than dam l'kaf. I want to make a distinction. This concept of being hypercritical is usually when the person is not really affecting me. I just don't like their style, or I don't like, it's like some kind of like I'm standing out here judging you. When you're bothered by somebody, it's more a matter of, not that I'm just being critical, but rather they're really bothering me. So we're definitely going to get to that. It's a whole topic of its own. Yes?
So when you say you have to put in more effort to not be critical of other people, is it that you pretend those negative things don't exist, or you put more positive than negative, or on a practical level?
That's everything that we're going to do today is going to answer that. What do? You're aware already. So what do? I'm going to definitely get to that. Hopefully we'll get to it today, and if not, it's going to be next week. But that's exactly what I want to do because we need some skills and how to look. When you've already noticed somebody's weaknesses, what are you supposed to do now? And that's exactly what this meeting is about. I'm going to get to it. Okay. So basically, if I want to put this in psychological terms, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch is relating to a certain kind of person who, if you're in my inner circle, you're safe. If you're my friend, if you're my role model, if you're somebody who I've chosen, you're safe. But if you're in my outer circle, meaning somebody who didn't make it, those are the people I'm critical of. Now I want to tell you that in psychology, and this is an extreme manifestation of what we're talking about, there's a psychological concept called xenophobia, with an X, not a Z. Xenophobia means fear of strangers. What does it mean to be xenophobic? It means that you go somewhere and you see somebody who's from a different cultural background than you, and you're like, oh, I don't know if I could trust her. I wouldn't eat her food. She might not be sanitary enough. Or, I don't know if she's so moral. I wonder what she does in her free time. There's something about the nature of cultures even that are xenophobic. if you would read what we say about the Arabs or whatever, and you read what the Arabs say about us, every culture accuses the enemy of being immoral, not sanitary, not honest, not blah, 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 blah. That's xenophobia, meaning you're not from my type, so I'm assuming that you have a lot of things. That's extreme. But to a certain extent, what Rav Shimshon Hirsch is talking about is something that smacks of xenophobia. Why? Because if I didn't choose you to be my type, if you're not my type enough to be my friend, then I'm looking at you with a magnifying glass and reminding myself of why you're not my type. So you're the kind of person who I'm most susceptible to be critical of. Because when you're going to say something and I'm not sure if it's honest or not, I'm going to be more likely to think, oh, she's lying. If you were my friend, I wouldn't necessarily think that about you. So Rosh Hashanah is saying, ask yourself, who am I most critical of? Am I critical of people who are not in my inner circle? And this is the way we are. And sometimes when we meet new people from new cultures and different backgrounds, this hypercriticism comes up more because I don't know her type so much. I don't trust her type so much. And then when I see you do something that I'm not sure, what's going on here, I might be more likely to think that you did the wrong thing than think that you did the right thing. That's Rosh Hashanah. That's a certain kind of person. Not everybody's like this. Let's look at the Be'er Avot. Be'er Avot is another parish on the Mishnah. And the Be'er Avot says exactly the opposite. Fascinating. This is a different kind of a person. You choose for yourself your rabbis, you choose for yourself your friends, and then don't be critical of them. Meaning, there's a certain kind of person who is most critical of their inner circle. Meaning, if I chose you to be my friend, I have standards, lady, and how dare you? I chose you to be my friend, and you're my rabbi, and that's the way you talk to your kids? Some people are more critical of the people who they've chosen to be in their inner circle. And if you're the stranger from the other culture, you're fine. But if you're lucky enough to be in my inner circle, my magnifying glass is going to be directed towards you. Because I keep on trying to keep you up to the standards. Like, if you're in my circle, you better live up to my standards. And I'm looking at you to see if you are going to live up to my standards. What psychological phenomena is related to this? Any ideas? Meaning, just like xenophobia is like the extreme form of not trusting people in your outer circle, what kind of person doesn't trust people in their inner circle? And I never thought of that before, but you're right. That's fascinating. Your name, I forgot to ask names. Leah. Paranoia, I'm going to say something else, but I meant something else, but paranoia is fascinating in that way. Because paranoia is a psychological phenomena. Everybody, let's look at paranoia for a second. There's a range of who I trust and who I don't trust. If you drive into Ramallah in the middle of the night and you see a man walking behind you and you don't trust him, that's not called paranoia. That's 100% normal, right? Because some people, you're not supposed to trust them. That's like a zero on the Look, a zero would be somebody who walks in Ramallah in the middle of the night and doesn't care and it's fine. That's somebody who's really like almost the other extreme. And then you have situations where it's appropriate to not be trusting. That's paranoia. That's not paranoia. That's very low. And then you have the people who, when they walk in Yerushalayim late at night and there's somebody walking behind them, they're also a little shaky. That's also normal, but it's a little higher on the nervous about people. Then you have the people who walk in the middle of the day in Yerushalayim and don't trust anybody they see. We're already moving up, right? And then you have the people who walk in their own dormitory and are looking around all the time. That's higher. And then, and this is really what you're saying, I once had such a situation where I had a student who told me that her mother probably was clinically paranoid. Anytime she couldn't find her wallet, she would think, which one of my kids stole it from me? That's sad. That's high-level paranoia, because that's in an inner circle where you're supposed to trust. If you can't trust, and if you read in the DSM, which is the handbook of psychology, when it describes paranoia, it describes people who don't trust their loved ones. People who, whenever their spouse isn't there, they're wondering what their spouse is up to, what are they doing, what's he doing. That's paranoia. So I agree with you. That if you can't trust your inner circle, there's some level of paranoia going on. Fascinating. I never thought of it before, but you're absolutely right. I meant something a little different. What I was referring to was perfectionism. Because what perfectionistic people hold themselves to a very, very high standard. So I'm willing to stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning to get my nails just right, or to get the 99 on the test, or to do that project perfectly, because I'm a perfectionist, meaning I value my we're going to talk about perfectionists at some point over the year. The perfectionist basically challenges or questions their self-value if they're not performing to the highest extent. They don't accept themselves. They need to prove to themselves and to the world that they're perfect. Now, why is this related to what we're talking about? Because perfectionists are often very tough on their inner circle as well. If you're my child, you better live up to my standards. If you're my spouse, you better always look put together. And I want to tell you something very, very interesting. I deal with a lot of people in dating and watch relationships develop. So somebody who's not perfectionistic might start going out with a boy, and they might tell me at a very early stage in the relationship, he's a great guy, but I don't like this and this about him, or like his laugh is a little funny, or I see that he has this and this. As they develop in the relationship, but if I'll say to them, what about that thing that bothered you? They'll say, oh, it's bothering me less and less. Why is that? Because as you get to know the person better, and they're in your inner circle more, you exact on them the same standards that you have for yourself. So if you have a nice level of self-acceptance, and you basically accept your weaknesses, you want to work on yourself, but you're able to live with your weaknesses, then when this person was a stranger to me, I noticed his weaknesses. But now that he's in my inner circle, I kind of accept him for who he is. The perfectionist is exactly the opposite. When they first meet a person, the person's imperfections don't bother them because he's still a stranger. But as they develop in a relationship and they get closer and closer to somebody, they're calling me up to say, I don't know, I don't like this about him, I don't like that. The night before their engagement, I'm not sure about this, I'm not sure about that. Why? Because as a stranger, perfectionists don't care about other people's standards. But if you're going to be in my inner circle, if you're reflecting me, because you're my husband or my child or whatever, then you better live up to the standards. And the closer I get to you, the more I put my own perfectionistic standards onto you. And I don't know how many of you here, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, are daughters or perfectionistic mothers. But it's not easy. When somebody is critical of the way you look, and critical of the way you talk, and critical of your teeth, and critical of your grades, and critical of your friends, and critical... Why? Because perfectionistic people exact difficult standards on the people who they live with. It's so interesting because the xenophobic type mother will say to the child, oh, Yoni, you're wonderful. Don't play with Moshe. He's not our type. That's the xenophobic type. You're in my inner circle, Yoni, you're great, but Moshe's not our type. The perfectionistic mother will turn to Yoni and say, Yoni, why can't you be more like Moshe? He always looks put together. His shirt is always tucked in. He gets 100 on every test. Why can't you be more like him? You see the difference? Who am I critical of? The outer circle, the boy across the street, he's not our type, or the inner circle, my son is not good enough for me. And that's why we want to get on top of this midah. Because this midah affects the way you treat people in the world. And basically, the Rav Shimshon Hirsch is talking about the kind of person who's critical of their outer circle. The Be'er Avot is talking about the kind of person who's critical of their inner circle. I once gave a share. There's a married lady sitting in my chair. She starts sighing. Ay. So I said to her, what's wrong? She says, I'm both. Critical of my inner circle and critical of my outer circle. That also is possible. Some people are critical of everybody. One last point on the Mishnah before we go on. Don't go over time. Oh, good, have some time. The Yismach Moshe. The Yismach Moshe also appears in Parkei Avot. He makes a very interesting observation on the Mishnah. He says, why does it say, choose your Rav, choose your friend, and judge people favorably? It's talking about maintenance. Very interesting. You chose friends. You chose role models. You want to maintain those relationships? Don't be a critical person. Critical people end up losing their friends and losing their rabbis. So you've gone through this process where you painfully created a circle of friends and role models. If you're critical, you'll lose them. Critical people are not pleasant to be around, and people kind of move away from them. And that's what the Yitzhak Moshe say. Okay, any questions on this before we go further? Yeah. Everything we said till now is working off of the assumption that my critical nature has more to do with who I'm critical of than what I'm critical of. Meaning that perfectionistic mother is going to be tough on her child about the looks, about the grades, about the friends, about the everything. Or people who don't trust people who are not in their outer circle will not trust the parenting skills of those people, the aesthetic skills of those people, the hygiene in their house, the mitzvos, the morality. It's not really about what, it's about who. If you trigger me, then I can be critical of a lot of things about you. Now, somebody raised her hand when I was teaching this someplace else, and she says to me, this doesn't resonate by me, any of it. I can't find a pattern myself. I'm not really an inner circle critique. I'm not an outer circle critique. I said to her, maybe you're the kind of person who it's the topic that gets you going and not the person. And she said, yes. So that's what we're moving on to right now. People who cannot find patterns in who they're critical of, but they can find patterns in what they're critical of. Now, there's something very interesting about being critical, and it's unfortunate, but it comes with the territory. We're often critical about topics that we care about very much. So with the territory of growing as a person, sometimes comes the negative side effect of therefore being critical of everybody who's not growing the way that I'm growing. And this is our struggle in growth, is to be able to raise our standards and not be critical of the people who are not on the same standard. I'll give you an example. One person once said to me, actually this happened to me also. I used to be not so health conscious, and then I started learning more and more about nutrition, about feeding your kids whole wheat and trying to stay away from food coloring and whatever. And I can't help it. Now that I read about it, I cannot help noticing how many mothers shove sugar and food coloring into their kids 24 hours a day. So now it's a struggle for me to not be critical of a mother who's feeding their child poison. I'm not a health freak. I still do it sometimes myself. But now that I'm aware of it, I have a new thing now that I have to watch myself not to be critical of everybody who's, but before I knew about it, it was fine. I'm sitting in the park and some lady's giving her child sour sticks or whatever. That's great, no problem. Now that I know what's not healthy, I have to watch myself to not be critical of people who are feeding their kids unhealthy things. Even though I still do it myself, but I'm still aware of who else is doing it. So unfortunately, what comes with the territory of growth is the fact that we are now challenged that there's another area that I have to be careful not to know. It's very hard. You learn a new halacha, and you're being careful about that halacha. You can't help but notice all the people who are not being careful about that halacha. And this is our struggle in our growth, is that we want to make sure that we're going up in our ben adam lamakom, in our sensitivities, but we're not going down in our ben adam lachavero, in our relationships with others because of our sensitivities. And that's a challenge. I have to tell you that when people go home and they say to me, I grew so much in Israel, I can't go back to my mono-Orthodox shul. It bothers me so much that the woman did this and that. I said to them, maybe you're not ready to go back yet. You have to go back feeling I am proud of my standards and I'm not being critical of people who don't have the same standards. And that's the question that we really have to get to. How? But this is a litmus test for success, is that I'm not going back for everybody to hate the fact that I'm so critical now of everything. I want to tell you a fascinating story. It happened to me many, many years ago. When I first was in chinuch, when I was a madricha, so it puts me back a long time, around 19 years old, I had a girl who was very unusual. She came from a very, very mono-Orthodox background. She came to Israel and she was like a flip out plus. Every month was a new standard, a new haircut, a new form of dress, a new something that was of a higher and higher and higher religious standard. Somebody set her up once with a family in Meir Sharon for Shabbos, and she became a Meir Sharon person. I had never seen this. I don't want to say the name of the school, but it was a seminary like yours. Not typical for a girl to be hanging out in Meir Sharon. And this is who she became close with. There was something very intense about her. So by her second year in Israel, she already was barely in her seminary, didn't agree with any of the hashkafa of her seminary because she was hanging out with Naturi Karta and Meir Sharm. Yeah. Only happened to me once in many years. At the end, this is almost hysterically funny. At the end of her Shana Bet, her parents, who I don't know where they were probably out to lunch, but they said to her, "Hi, you're coming back to college in New York." I guess I could say, "You're coming to Stern." Now, I don't know how many of you know Stern, but like a Meir Sharm girl in Stern doesn't really fit in so well, especially in the middle of Manhattan. She said, "There's no way that I'm going back to college in New York." Somebody convinced her to go ask the Rav a question, a shaila, and she was convinced that the Rav would agree with her. So this was during Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach's lifetime. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach had an unbelievable ability to read between the lines and understand what people weren't saying when they asked the shailas. And it's a unique skill, because most people will read you at face value, but he had the ability to understand much deeper than what you were saying. She walks into Rosh Zalman Auerbach. She says, "This is my standards. I'm, a Meir Sharm girl." And then he says, "What goes on in Manhattan and what's Stern College like?" And she's explaining the very, very, very level of religious, standards. And he says to her, "Oh, I think you're going back to Stern College." So she's like totally blown away. But Rabbi, no, I understand. I understand that you're going to be different. But Rabbi, how am I going to get married? He says, "How long does it take to finish college?" She said, "Oh, I'll be 23. "Okay, you'll start dating at 23. It's okay, you'll come back to Israel, then you'll find somebody." She couldn't believe it. If it wasn't for the fact that she had Emunat Chachamim, there was no way she could have followed this. But the rabbi told her to do it, and she did it. She looked pretty funny back in Manhattan. She came to visit me 3 years later. And in the meantime, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach had passed away. And he had said to her, "Come back to me when you're finished. When you finish your schooling." She couldn't come back to him. She comes to visit me 3 years later, and she comes to me crying. She says, "Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach understood something about me that I didn't understand about myself. My religious observance was going up, 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 but my love and appreciation for people was going down. I was burning with anger at everybody who was different than me. And he knew that by putting me back in that environment, I was not going to lower my standards, but what was going to go up was my love for people, and I was going to catch up." Now, I'm not saying that he would say the same thing to everybody, but with her, he understood that that was the remedy. That a holistic Jew, the Ben Adam L'Chavera and Ben Adam L'Makom have to be the same. You're going up in religious standards is not an excuse for you to be more critical of other people. So she says to me, first day I was in Stern, I'm walking down the hall, and there's this girl in this mini, mini, mini skirt, it's barely a skirt, and she's davening mincha. And I'm burning with anger. Who needs your mincha if you're wearing this skirt like that? She's thinking to herself. She didn't say it to the girl. She said the next day, I saw the same girl with the same skirt, davening mincha in the same place. And I started seeing her every day. After a few days of seeing her, I started appreciating the fact that she was so careful to daven mincha, that she always made the time and the place to daven properly. And I started appreciating her. And she said, that's what happened to me over my years in college. She said, I look the same. I didn't change the way I look. But I love Jews now. And I love people who don't look like me. And that is what the Rav understood that I didn't understand about myself. That's what we're trying to accomplish with this mitzvah. We're trying to say, you can learn a lot and grow a lot, but you have to make sure not to be critical of people who are not growing like you. And that's our goal. Let's see how much time I have. Nope. I have 3 more minutes, 2 more minutes, okay. Okay, I really want to answer your question. So we have a lot to do with this mitzvah. I will end with a certain point, but we have a lot more to say. Just to give you something to think about. What happens when you can't help it? You just learned that something is a halacha, or you know that something is a behavior which must be done, and you're watching somebody who has the same education as you, and it doesn't go through the levels that they're not, but there they are doing this thing that I know that they're not allowed to do. What am I supposed to do? So Tzvi Maria Zilberberg says a beautiful idea. And next week we're going to go into the sources in the Gemara that deal with this more. He says, when you see somebody doing something inappropriate, whether it's a halacha thing, or they just acted very, very selfish, or they just said something really not nice, or whatever it is, whatever the thing is that triggers you, you are catching somebody exposed who doesn't realize that they're exposed. If they thought it was embarrassing to act that way, they wouldn't act that way. They're acting that way because they don't realize it's a problem, or they don't care, or whatever it is. But you know that it's inappropriate what they're doing. So the mashal, he doesn't give this mashal, I brought it down to a woman's level, and we'll end up with this. Let's say you see a very, very well-dressed woman walking down the street, except that her zipper's open, or her slip is coming down. It's so embarrassing. She's walking as if she's on top of the world, and you know that her zipper's open. What do we do when we see somebody like this? If you're not going to go and say to her, by the way, your zipper's open, which many people will not do, so what do? What's the appropriate thing to do? To look away. I feel bad. Meaning, I'm catching her exposed in a way that she would not want to be caught exposed if she knew, she just doesn't know. So I look away modestly. I'm like, I'm not going to look at it. I feel bad. I'm not going to look. And then what's the next thing we do? And this is so psychological. We check our own zipper to make sure that it's closed properly. Isn't that what we do? When you see somebody, like something happens to somebody, you like check to make sure, and somebody says, I lost my wallet, all of a sudden you're like feeling to see if your wallet is there, right? So when you see somebody with their zipper open, you're like, oh my gosh, I hope mine is okay. Tzvi Meyer Zilberg does not give that mashal, he gives more like a man's mashal. But what's the message in Dan L'Kasra? I caught you exposed, but you don't realize that you're exposed. Either because you don't realize that you're selfish, or you don't even realize that you're acting selfish, or you don't care because you don't realize how important it is to not be selfish. Whatever it is, look away. I'm sorry I saw that. I'm sorry I saw that. You wouldn't want me to see it. And then I check my own, meaning it happened to me too. I'm sure there are areas where people pick up things about me that if I realized, I'd be embarrassed if they noticed that about me, because I'm not perfect either. It turns the criticism, it's not, and that's my answer to your question, it's not that I didn't see right. Maybe you saw right, but I don't want to focus on your weaknesses because I'm sorry I saw that. I wish I wouldn't have seen that in you. And it allows me to modestly turn away and know that, you know what, I have my imperfections too, and I wouldn't want to be caught red-handed. That's it for today, girls. I'm going to encourage you to think about this midah. Who am I critical of? The inner circle, the outer circle, both. And what am I critical of? And we'll continue next week. Thank you so much. Sure. Until I get kicked out.
We have room at Brooks.